Well, hello, grievers. Mandy here. Restorative Grief is all about creating easy access to healing, no matter where or who you are. That's why I want you to remember that if you want grief support beyond a podcast, our Patreon features monthly workbooks to accompany each episode, as well as a Discord channel for more private chats and occasional bonus content as well. Supporting this work with your finances means investing in your own wellness and the healing of others, and that in itself is an incredibly generous and restorative practice. The link to the Patreon is in the show notes, but reach out with questions, okay? Now, let's get on to this week's episode. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 175, titled To Hell and Back with Momoko Uno. Pandemic grief has touched all of our lives, and my guest today is no exception. Momoko Uno's memoir, 14 Days, a memoir of love, loss, and quarantine hell, is a heartfelt exploration of grief, love, and resilience during the COVID-19 pandemic. It chronicles her emotional journey from New York to Australia, trying to reach her terminally ill mother before she passed. Uno vividly captures the uncertainty of quarantine life while processing her profound personal losses, and her words offer raw reflections on love, grief, and finding light in the darkest times. So I am just honored to have her here with us today to talk about resilience in the face of profound challenges. Hey everyone, welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I'm your host, Mandy, and today my guest is Momoko Uno. She's the author of this beautiful memoir, 14 Days, a memoir of love, loss, and quarantine hell. In her book, she shares her deeply personal story of navigating a pandemic while grappling with the impending loss of her own mom. So I'm very honored to bring you her story and her heart today because I don't know about you, but the phrase quarantine hell resonated in my bones, and everything within me said, this is a woman I need to speak with. So, Momoko, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks so much for having me on your show.
Absolutely. I really want to know, you described the uncertainty of the pandemic, which we all experience to this day, and intermingling it with your own personal crisis and grief. What was it that made you feel you needed to write a book about it instead of just, going inward and hiding it like the majority of the world has done?
I have always wanted to write a book, and it was the experience that I went through that I decided during quarantine that if I made it out alive, that life was too short, and I wanted to go forward and do the things that I really wanted to do with my life. And one of those things was to write. So I used this as an opportunity while I was actually in quarantine to write the book. And it wasn't really one of those things where I thought, this is going to be a bestseller and this was just really for myself. I did it because it was a personal goal that I had.
Yeah.
And then, I shared it with some people, and I was just going to give it to friends and family. And they said, why don't you just put it on the market and see what happens? It's deeply personal, extremely embarrassing, some of the things that I write about myself. But it's been a really great journey because a lot of people have read it at this point and said that it was relatable and it was somehow helpful for them. So I'm glad that I did it.
Yeah. Okay, tell me what quarantine hell means to you.
So I'm Australian, and quarantine hell, Australia took quarantine hell to another level.
Yes, they
So
did.
quarantine hell for me was Australian government mandated quarantine, which was 2 week long period of being in solitary confinement in a hotel room by yourself with a guard outside your door and the windows bolted shut.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
So
don't think the world understands how intensely Australia took it.
yeah, they're no joke. It's Australia's being an island. They take quarantine extremely seriously.
Yeah.
And they don't want to bring in any bugs. And understandable, right? If you
Sure.
have the ability to be able to keep your residents safe, the citizens safe, why not? But at the same time, by doing that, they actually traumatized so many of their citizens, shutting Australian citizens out of the country. and then forcing for them to go through this excruciating experience. Because the only people that were going back into Australia, there were some people in the military who were coming in and out, but in general, you were only permitted to go back to Australia under tragic circumstances. So pretty much everybody in hotel quarantine was going through a traumatic experience on top of already some kind of tragedy or loss.
Yeah. So your experience with your mom and what she was going through, tell me how that intermingled with all of this that you were writing about.
So my mother was supposed to live a lot longer. And we had hoped that she was going to live her prognosis, which was supposed to be at least a year from when she was diagnosed with terminal cancer. But that didn't happen. So from the time that she was actually diagnosed with stage 4 cancer until when she passed away was 6 weeks, I think.
Wow.
So it was a very, very short period of time. And so I was forced to, if I wanted to see my mother, I was forced to travel during the height of the pandemic. And I thought, if she lived a whole year, I think quarantine ended at around the time, about a year after I went. So I would have bypassed all of that experience. But, I guess for some reason I shouldn't say meant to go through it, but I decided that that's what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like I had to see my mum
Yeah.
one last time.
Yeah.
So I went through it knowing that it was going to be a grueling experience. And it was unfortunately, it was worse than what I had anticipated.
Yeah. I think a lot of us in the aftermath, certainly we weren't in hotels with guards outside necessarily, but I know that that sense of isolation, pulling away from communities, even if it wasn't specific quarantine, lockdown, there was so much secondary and just superfluous trauma that continued to happen even after the doors were opened. How have you processed through what you were experiencing beyond writing a book and saying, okay, I've written the book, it's done now, it's out? I know there's so much more that surfaces.
Absolutely. I think for me, a lot of it has been time, and because there was just the general quarantine of being in New York City and the hotspot of COVID and dealing with all of that. And I think that anybody that was, well, pretty much the whole world can relate to that, right? Unless you're from my hometown, Perth, Australia, where everybody was running around like nothing had happened because they were in this bubble and there were no COVID cases there. So they really didn't experience it, other than they couldn't go on vacation,
Wow.
leave Western Australia. But the rest of the world was pretty much, I'm sure there are pockets all over the world where they had little areas where they weren't really, there wasn't high risk. But the rest of the world, everybody knew somebody that had passed away, right? And I think that it's just taken, I think people are still very concerned about it, and still dealing with the aftermath of the pandemic on an emotional level.
Mhm.
And I think and you can see it with the children, how it's affected them in terms of social development.
Yeah.
And they're still behind. They didn't catch up, a lot of the kids, the social development part at least.
Yeah.
And I think that's huge. And we'll see more of how that impacts them when they become adults.
Yeah.
It's only in hindsight we'll see, what kind of damaging and lasting effects it has had.
Yeah. My daughter was in kindergarten during 2020, and I actually changed my career toward grief full time at the same time because I recognize we're about to enter generations of untended grief. I can't live in a world where I'm not doing something to help shift that feeling. So, as a doctor of integrative medicine, I assume you are also seeing so much of the aftermath yourself. What about your work has shifted now because of your understanding and your awareness of this grief that we're all carrying?
So I have historically always treated trauma,
Mhm.
and complex trauma in particular, and its effect on the body, especially to do with chronic illness.
Mhm.
So that part hasn't hasn't changed as much, but I can see how now more people have trauma from the pandemic. And I think just the tumultuous times that we're living in right now, I think it really affects everyone. Anybody that, reads, listens to the news, or, living in a big city, there's just so much chaos. And I think that that is creating a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety in people in general. And that
Yeah.
affects your health. It robs your sleep. And then once you're not sleeping well, then general health starts to go, poorly in general.
Yes. What are you doing? What do you do as an individual to care for yourself with all of this vicarious trauma that we're witnessing?
So I try to do things that make me happy. And and that could be little things. It could be little things that I look forward to, and then things that are a little, are more like long-term projects. But I try to fill my life with as much joy as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've been a lifelong dancer, and I started when I was 3 years old, something that my mother introduced me to, and it's something that I love. So I try to do that as often as possible. And I try to laugh. I watch funny videos and read funny things. As a writer, I actually started off doing writing comedy. So I try to write a little bit, not every day, but maybe like 3 days, 3 times a week. And so I try to keep my energy positive, because otherwise, if I don't, and if I just allow myself to succumb to the negative energy of what's going on in the world and around me,
Mm-hmm.
I think I would spiral into darkness.
Yeah. Yeah. Resilience as a skill set is so hard won, I think, when we are finding ourselves in amid these just cyclones of re-traumatizing events and encountering more grief situations that we maybe didn't even know we were carrying. Being able to access joy is a really, really almost complicated experience for
Mm-hmm.
people. What do you do when you feel all that resistance in you? That's like, why would I pursue joy right now? I'm trying to be miserable.
Yes, I hear you. And there were times when I was miserable and there was zero joy, like just not happy, upset, crying all the time. And during acute phases like that, I just allowed myself to be whatever I was in the moment. And I tried not to judge myself. Like, okay, I'm just going to cry. I'm just crying right now. I'm really anxious. I'm very afraid. I'm really angry. None of these things are joyful at all. But I
Yeah.
think that if we don't resist these experiences, then we can move through them more quickly.
Yeah. I think I am an integrative practitioner as well. And I think that that ability to recognize, oh, I'm resisting this. What is it that's causing the resistance? Where is it connected so that I can metabolize this and move through it? That language, though, is hard for people to understand. How do you introduce that kind of thought process to someone who is like, what the heck are you talking about? What do you mean move through something? How do I move through the biggest loss of my life?
Um, so it depends on the person. If somebody has had no experience with loss or grief in the past, and that this is their first major loss in their life, that's very, very difficult, I think. And the older you get, and you've had no perspective
Yeah.
on grief and loss, it is just challenging to deal with. For other people who have had experience, just a reminder of, okay, you went through something and you worked through it, and then you went through periods of being okay. Just kind of having that awareness and understanding that, yes, these are very difficult times, but it's going to cycle through your system. Just
Mhm.
knowing that, I think, is helpful, that this isn't going to be a permanent
Yeah.
state that you're going to be in.
Yeah, that idea that there are individuals who are past a certain age and have never experienced the state of grief is, well, it might be unheard of at this point, although avoidance can be very strong. But it's interesting to consider how we interact every day with people who probably never considered their own grief stories or their own losses.
I've met, because of my private practice, I have the opportunity to meet with hundreds of people, and there are a lot of people who haven't experienced much grief, and some don't know how to, that they don't know what it will be like if they were to lose somebody close.
Yeah.
There some people are concerned about it, and other people just don't know, so they just they don't know, so they don't know how that they would feel. um so it's an interesting experience, and there are people who go through a loss, and as they go through these different stages, and it depends on what stage I meet somebody. If they're in, I've had patients that will go into a state of shock and denial for quite some time, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So we just hang out in the shock and the denial until that's over. I don't feel like I need to pull them out of that. It's just, I think grief is about honoring where you are individually speaking.
Yeah.
And I think that when they come out of it naturally, and they want to, if they're feeling, for example, if they say to me, oh my God, I'm just feeling, I'm so numb, and I want to be able to get out of that, then we have something to talk about. But if there's not, if they seem okay with their experience, then I'm okay too.
I love that you're not trying to force someone into the shape of what you expect or even into healing before they're ready. I think that's so integral because we see a lot of people who come along and position themselves as grief supporters,
Mm-hmm.
but really they are so uncomfortable with our stories or with our pain that they immediately try to make things okay through any number of means, but inadvertently they're causing so much additional harm by non-verbally saying, I'm not the one to support you through this. I can't sit with you while you're uncomfortable. Get okay because I need my friend back. And it sounds loving, but it's anything but.
No, it's not at all. I think to be able to hold space for somebody in wherever they are in their grief process is key.
How do you cultivate strength to remain present with yourself in your own story after losing your mom, with your family, with your friends, whomever you're encountering? I mean, we all know that we have this ebb and flow of ability to stay present with ourselves. What brings you strength in the process?
That's a good question. But I think that looking back at my life, I have chosen to do things that are challenging for me. I wouldn't say that it's challenging for everybody, right? But for me, it feels challenging. Like, for example, like taking a yoga class. Like, I have a love-hate relationship with yoga. I hate doing it, but I like how I feel afterwards. But so I try to do yoga, and I'm in this horrible position, and it hurts like hell. And I try to smile, you know, and so that's just an example
Okay.
of learning how to be resilient and strong, for me at least,
Yeah.
is by practicing these things that are really challenging, and to stay centered. And then somehow that, I don't know how this all happens internally, but that somehow seems to miraculously work in life. That seems to be a transferable skill, I
Yeah.
found.
I love the idea of choosing a challenge that is ultimately not something that you would choose just because you're like, I'm going to grow, I'm going to heal, I'm going to do something
Yeah.
cool, I'm going to climb this mountain and it's going to be so awesome. We choose that because we're like, oh, all I want to do is be a mountain climber. To choose something like yoga, which is absolutely, I'm agreeing 100% with you, so difficult sometimes. And yet we know the process itself is where the strength comes from. It's not the muscles we build at the end of it. It's that experience through holding a position, checking our posture, centering in on our breath, whatever that is, coming into the moment and really being with ourselves that allows us to show up differently after the challenge is done.
Absolutely. And it can be anything that we choose to do, I think. And to focus on seeing if you can stay centered and calm, and then also having pride in yourself that you can see improvement too.
Mm,
I
mhm,
think those are all helpful.
mm. How do you navigate what it's like to have children and have lost their grandmother? Out of curiosity, out of personal curiosity, I've lost my mom as well. And I think about it all the time. So when I meet people who've gone through this, I want to know, how are you raising kids and helping them understand what it's like?
Well, I try not to project my grief onto them and try to understand that they have their own unique relationship with, they had a unique relationship with my mother, and also because they were quite, well, like my youngest was quite young when my mother passed away, so her understanding of death opposed to my oldest child is going to be very different.
Hmm.
And so I just try to navigate through that on the level where their level of consciousness was.
Hmm.
And for my youngest, it wasn't really, there wasn't a whole lot, because I don't think when you're that young, you really even understand death. And also she has some cognitive delays too. So even though she was, I think she was probably about 9 when my mother passed away, she was cognitively maybe about 5. And so there's a huge difference, yeah.
Hmm.
And my oldest was a teenager, and so that was more talking and asking if they what do they wanted to talk about, but actually, and it's come up in different ways as they've also matured as well, the reflections. And I think for me at least, just honoring again where they are as individual people and seeing what they need in the moment has been my approach.
Mm. How do you help them develop that sense of individuality and maybe even that turn toward a challenge for their own resilience and skill building as they get older?
Um, that's a good question too. I think, all kids are, they're very, very different. And in terms of what works for one and what works for another is, I think, going to be different too. I think how we parent each child is going to be different. So every child needs to be parented in the way that's going to work for them. And so I've had to change the way that I parent my children as a result. And in terms of with resilience, that's been tricky because I think that resilience is so many different levels, right? You've got physical resilience, you have mental and emotional resilience. So my kids have resilience that is on different levels at all those different levels, if that makes sense. So, one might have high emotional resilience, but another one has more physical resilience. And then, a year changes and they're at a different place. So often it's a matter of just gauging week by week what they need in the moment.
Mhm.
Sorry, that sounds so vague, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't. It's perfect because I think we are always looking for a clean cut answer. And to have someone who has experienced it firsthand affirm, no, dear friend, there is no clean cut answer. It really takes remaining in the middle of it and staying present with your people and reading them well to learn how to heal together, because it's a holistic process. That whole person belongs there. That whole person needs attention, and it's going to change what type of attention they need or when they need it. And so I think that's a really helpful answer. And on the same vein, how do you support yourself watching these kids, older kids even, adjusting and shifting, knowing that every time you interact with them, it's touching a part of your grief story as well? How are you holding space for yourself to, again, not project what you're experiencing, but to internalize, what am I experiencing in this moment too? And how can I show up for myself?
So I think with kids, at least mine, I have had quite a strong filter. I haven't shared that much with my kids because
Sure.
they had a very different relationship with my mother, because we live in America and my family's Australian. So the amount of time that they've actually spent with my family has been limited.
Hmm.
So in terms of um a collective healing, it hasn't really, that sometimes you can grieve somebody's loss with somebody else
Yeah.
because you've lost a friend together and you can talk about it. So that wasn't my experience with my children. So
Yeah.
it was very measured in terms of what I shared with them, because I don't, one, age, it's not appropriate to share certain personal things as a parent. That,
Yeah.
kids are your kids, they're not your friend. And
Yeah.
so I was mindful of that. And but in terms of taking space for myself, I think mostly share with my friends, close friends. Sometimes when I needed to talk to somebody who had more professional experience, then I would seek the guidance of somebody who has professional training.
Yeah.
But I think probably the best people that I spoke to were people who've gone through similar experiences. Like the first thing I did after I lost my second parent was to seek, and I was feeling better. First, I had to go through the exhaustion phase, and after I had some energy to talk to people, the first thing I did was call up all my friends who'd lost both parents.
Yeah.
And I just asked them, "So how did you heal from this?" Because I was spinning. I was in, it was I felt like I was flying in the air without a parachute, without a safety net, that kind of experience.
Yeah.
And I wanted to hear how my friends made peace with that experience.
Yeah.
So that was very helpful for me.
Making peace with it is an incredible image, right? Especially if you're jumping out of a plane without a parachute before it, you've got to make peace. Sorry,
Yeah.
that was terrible.
No, no, it's okay.
I do want to
Yeah.
say, though, I applaud you for recognizing your children's limitations and their ability to understand and carry what you're carrying, because I think it's more common for people to have really porous boundaries around their kids when they are grieving, simply because they don't have them healthy boundaries for themselves. They don't necessarily know what they're saying is inappropriate or not developmentally appropriate, whether it's, whether they can't understand it, whether they're too young, whether they have no grid for the language, or even just the capacity to hold space, what that means for someone else. I know a lot of people who've grieved and then realized too late, wow, I dumped all of that on my 10-year-old, or I was trying to show them it's okay to grieve. And so I actively was grieving all the time in their presence, as opposed to having the wisdom and ability and support really to compartmentalize and to keep some things for yourself, because I think that that's huge. And later when they're older and they ask questions, that's a different conversation. But as children, they deserve to experience life as children. And that doesn't mean shelter. That just means with support, right? With safety, to be able to explore them for themselves what they're experiencing, and not just pick up on what, as intuitive as kids are, what mom or dad or friends are also grieving too. So well done with that.
Oh, thank you.
Mhm. I think the interesting thing about what you just said was, um, when I get through the exhaustion phase, and I want to touch on that for a minute, because I think
Yeah.
exhaustion is something we discount in grief. We think, oh, I'm just tired because I'm not sleeping as well. And to your point earlier, you lose sleep, you lose everything. I'm a big fan of, if we could heal sleep problems, I think we would heal the world. Um, but that exhaustion is like a bone deep weariness. It goes beyond fatigue even. Um, Talk about that experience for you and how you begin to reinvigorate yourself after you allow yourself to stay in exhaustion phase.
So just to give you a little bit of backstory of what exactly I experienced as as fatigue. So there were moments when felt okay, and then I knew within 5 minutes I was going to be out cold. And I could feel it just coming on. And sometimes I'd be having a conversation with a friend on the phone about something not even related to my mother's death. And I could feel the light switch dimming. And
Wow.
I remember telling them, I'm going to be asleep in 2 minutes. I gotta go. And it's just, I didn't have a choice. And so I just slept as much as I needed. And sometimes that meant 3 naps a day.
Wow.
And that went on for, I think it went on for a couple of months.
Wow.
I had to take some time off work. There was absolutely no way that I could function in a typical work schedule. And yeah, I worked 1 day a week for maybe 3 months, actually, I think,
Wow.
before I was physically ready to have a typical schedule again.
Yeah.
Took quite some time. And so there were days when I think I was sleeping 14 hours a day. I
Mm.
knew that there was nothing wrong. And because grief is exhausting. the emotional energy it takes to process it is extreme. And
Yeah.
it's having like like a virus. It's like a grief virus or something.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't understand how exhausting it is, and they push themselves so that they can have their regular schedule, and that actually ends up making them quite sick.
Much
Unfortunately,
worse.
yeah, they
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking, it's kind of like how it takes us, what, 13 muscles to smile and like almost 50 muscles to frown. Well, when you use a muscle consistently, it's fatigued and gets
That's
sore
interesting.
and it hurts. And when you are using fewer muscles, they can also fatigue, but we use them a little bit each day. But just the idea that, of course, sorrow takes so much out of you. It's not a state where we can remain for a long period of time in the same way that high energy, joyous expression that you feel, I don't know, at a theme park or whatever. It's the same intensity. We don't maintain that constantly either. And so I think recognizing that our energy is on a spectrum just like anything else is so crucial. But even that permission to take naps. I had a client the other day who said, "What do you mean go take a nap? It's the middle of the day." And I'm like, "You can't keep your eyes open talking to
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
I need you to go rest. I need you to
yeah,
recognize that that's necessary." "Well, I have to get these things done." I'm like, when who says? Whose deadlines? Whose standards, right?
yeah.
Allowing our standards to really shift as we grieve and learn what healing means is an incredible permission we can give ourselves.
Absolutely. And it's unfortunate that people operate on what they should be doing rather than what they need to be doing for
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah.
And as soon as we shift that mentality, I think that going through the grief process, at least from a physical perspective and in terms of regaining the energy, I think it becomes a little bit easier. I'm not saying it's easy because it's never easy, right? But I think we can move through it with a little bit more grace.
Yeah. What would you say is one of the ways that you are aware of that mentality needing to shift in your own life from the shoulds to meeting the needs with intention?
So in terms of just with grief or just in general,
I mean, in the grief lens is great.
um, I think that in the grief lens, I think that well again for work, right? Oh, I should be working. Uh yes, paying the bills is nice, but if I can't focus on what I'm doing, that's also not great either. I just acknowledging that I really needed to be taking this time off
Yeah.
to so that I could be a more, efficient person later. I think that if I had tried to push myself through that, I would have actually prolonged my recovery, I
Yeah.
think. So from that perspective, I think that listening to my body's needs, and being actually there are times when, people wanted to talk to me, but I didn't have the energy. So I, said, I'm sorry, I don't have the energy to talk to you right now. On one level, I wanted to, but it just wasn't there.
Yeah.
And it wasn't, and I didn't want it to, I know it sounds kind of a little bit mean, but my priority was to rest.
Yeah. I actually don't think it sounds mean. I think we've been trained as a culture to say this is
Yeah,
mean, to not give your full attention to anyone that wants it at any given moment.
yeah,
Um, that demand on our time, I think, is why we just minimize our pain so that we can be all things to all people while being zero things to the one in the middle of it all at that
yes,
point, right? If we
yes,
are so exhausted we can't keep our eyes open, but we feel obligated to show up and I don't know, listen to someone's complaint about the grocery store prices, however mundane their life is in that
yeah,
moment, that's really a disservice to them as well. It's not teaching them to care for themselves. It's not teaching them to recognize cues in other people that they're not available. And
yeah,
I think that's disintegrating so much of our culture, which is probably why during the pandemic and even now, we're seeing that cultural lack of awareness and sensitivity to each other that lack of care really manifest.
Absolutely. But I do think the good thing about the pandemic, there's a silver lining, is that people have been more focused on what's a priority. I think
Yeah.
there's definitely been a shift there,
Yeah.
and which I think is great.
Yeah.
I do think that happened. And then in terms of people in their lives, getting in touch with people that they might have had a connection with before, there was just a more space and time to do that. And so people were reconnecting with old friends and just touching base with people. And I think those are connections, and building connections, and reconnecting with people is very healing.
I agree. Yeah, that taking advantage of that open time where we can't be commuting or showing up in
Yeah.
workplaces necessarily. I know for myself, I made a ton of new friends on Twitter at the time, and it has turned into this incredible and small friend group of people I'm still talking to, right? Because I
Yeah.
could go for coffee, but I could sit with coffee. And I think giving ourselves even permission in that to just say, I don't have to start a new business because I'm in quarantine. I don't necessarily, which of course is what I did. And that's now, I say not everybody has to, but they don't. You don't have to write a book when you're in a place where things are too hard and you're really limited. You have to honor who you are and where you are right then and there. And that willingness to go toward yourself really does take a lot of strength and willingness to, or even just permission to look at where you're at and say, like, okay, well, what I need right now is a nap. Even though I've done nothing productive, quote unquote, today, I deserve to rest. And
Yes.
that has to be our baseline.
Absolutely. I think that resting in American culture is often seen as lazy
I
and not
know.
restorative, and it's very unfortunate.
It's wild to me. I mean, obviously, restorative grief, the
Yeah.
word's right there. And it just cracks me up when people don't prioritize rest, or even myself, when I'm not prioritizing it. I'm like, what is the whole point? What is the word? Mandy, you don't get to just say the word all
Mhm.
the time and then not lean into it, right? So, oh my gosh. Momoko, I am just curious, is there anything, any last like nugget of wisdom you would like to share with people listening about your experience and something that you really pulled out of writing the book and honoring your process and honoring what you needed?
I think that to understand that emotions affect us very physically,
Mhm.
because trauma is really housed inside the body. And so if you take care of your physical body, it will also help your emotional well-being too. So to not forget about the physical body when you're in grief, to take really good care of your body, love it, nurture it, I think is, and then in terms of um when you lose somebody, to understand that life is really very short, and to go for whatever your dreams are, and to make the people that you loved who have passed on proud.
I love that. Thank you so, so much for making time for me today and sharing your story. I'm going to make sure that the show notes have a link to your book so that people can read your words and experience the scary and heavy and even embarrassing stories that you
Yes,
might have
that's
told,
embarrassing.
because I think that that vulnerability shifts cultures and it shifts the atmosphere around grief, and that's exactly what we need. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to episode 175 of Restorative Grief. I want to remind you that as you face your own grief, you are choosing the challenge. You are leaning into the discomfort that you must learn to embrace if you want to experience healing and restoration in spite of any losses. Be sure to pick up a copy of Momoko's book, as well as connect with her on social media. Her heart for understanding the integrative impact of trauma is beautiful and absolutely needed for that whole person within to begin healing. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, I hope you remember that exhaustion is not only expected, but occasionally ongoing. So please remember to rest. That's the key to restoration. And if you're not able to do so with multiple naps a day, and I get that, try starting small with a slightly earlier bedtime or by eliminating screens before bed. Your brain will adjust and begin healing even with the smallest offering. And as always, before we go, one last thing. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.